Hey everyone, welcome to the stream. I'm CCP Convict and I'm joined here today by CCP Aurora, game designer for EVE Online, and CCP Psych, the Director of Economy and Systems. And we're going to be talking to you today about the Faction Warfare and Frontline system, which we gave you some information on yesterday in a dev blog that was released. We're going to be going to changes on the Faction Warfare, what the Frontline system is, the Advantage system, changes to complex access, and a whole bunch of other things. CCP Aurora's got a really cool presentation to show you guys. But first of all, CCP Aurora, I understand you penned
Yes.
the blog that went out yesterday.
I didn't fully pen it. I penned some copy of it,
Your
and then it goes
fingerprints are
through a
on it.
process. My
Yeah.
fingerprints are on it in terms of some of the information contained within.
Have you
So we'll
been?
be going over a bunch of the stuff that you saw in there, but with a whole lot more details, hopefully. And we get to kind of talk about the process that we've gone through thus far and where we're at. And yeah, hopefully you guys find it interesting.
All right, no worries. And CCP Psych, I mentioned you had some input on that as well. In fact, I assume the whole factional warfare changes, the update is something that you two have both been heavily working on before, but particularly since FanFest.
Well, actually, way before FanFest. This endeavor started, I would say, earlier this year. I would say end of January when we were given, what I would call the future vision of EVE Online, and we were given some pillars from management on, hey, where do we want to go with this? And it was the perfect time for us to sit down and create a frame of what are the things that we can fix, and at the same time create pillars on top of which we can stand and bring even more content into the game, and at the same time, so threefold, consolidate some of the systems that we already have in the game. I'm saying that because when you will hear CCP Aurora talk about the Frontline system, it's doing a lot of things at once for us. People might only see the faction warfare part of it, but for us internally is also a test, something that says, you know what, this, if you abstract the system, it's a hierarchy. And that hierarchy, if it works well within faction warfare, might work good in other places. But I will leave it at that, and I'll let CCP Aurora talk all about all the good stuff.
Before you launch into it, though, CCP Aurora, I did want to bring one thing up because this was the first piece of and most prominent piece of feedback or response to yesterday's dev blog, is that people were asking about the allegiance system that we were referring to at FanFest. And I don't know whether Psych or Aurora wants to answer that, but since I'm sure that's the first thing on people's minds, like it wasn't mentioned in the dev blog, is will people still be able to participate in faction warfare without having to leave their space friends and go join a faction warfare militia corporation specifically?
So that was part of the discussion since day one, because we find it to be a major issue, especially with new players that want to get involved in faction warfare, but if they're already playing with a group of people, they find out that they need to leave them behind, and we have that as part of the conversation from since day one. It's still part of the plan, but it's not an easy issue to tackle. We have a few ideas of how we can do it. Let's say as an initial step, but we don't have the details on when we can actually present the final design. Hopefully we'll have more information later, like I would say after summer. But yeah, it's still the plan. We want to make that happen. If it doesn't happen with the Frontline system, people will know way before that, when it will be coming, and probably some details on how we're planning to implement it, and also let them give us feedback on what we should probably adjust, things that we might haven't figured out, and all that. But it is a complex issue because it ties into many different, to other systems, and especially the standing system that no one really wants to look into.
It's a pretty complicated one, which is why discussions are still ongoing. It's really small decisions that can make or break a system like that. So, like, we're trying to decide, like, if a member of your corporation, goes to Caldari and you go to Galenti, exactly how do the rules of engagement work when you're both in high sec, and that sort of thing. It adds a lot of complexity. There's a lot of opinions, and we want to get it right. So conversation's still ongoing.
Yeah, it was particular interest to me and sort of thrown into relief for me personally, because after FanFest I was pretty hype about Faction Warfare as well. So I went and joined a militia corporation, or a player-run corporation, in Faction Warfare with the character I just usually play day to day on, and I realized very quickly that when the next live event came around and I wanted to stream it on the CCP TV channel on that same character, kind of made it hard to fly around in Minmatar space when you're a member of the Caldari militia. So I had to do a little bit of musical chairs with some other characters to free that character up and put the other one in there. For me, it was a pretty easy change, but I know there will be a lot of people who really want to participate in Faction Warfare as they hear more of the details of what we're going to be doing with it. So if we can facilitate that, even if it's not with the initial release, that would be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, there's a lot of other questions, kind of like the one you highlighted there. That's not so much the can I join without leaving my corporation question. That's the can I join while still being able to access Drita sort of question.
I guess that's probably more, like it.
Yeah, which is also related and also part of the discussion. So exactly what does it mean when you're in a militia and you try to enter enemy space? Because if you're at war and they're trying to stage out of that space, there's the Navy will shoot you so that you can't just infinitely harass them, although some people have figured out how to do that anyway. So anyway, we're taking a look at the whole system, and hopefully we'll have news for you in the next couple months.
All right. Now,
I would like to call out also, yes, we are looking at, patrol citadels are playing within the FW paradigm, and also the allegiance system is kind of tied into that. Like that's where it becomes complicated, but also becomes hopefully an elegant solution to multiple problems. And another one, which is, I'm sorry, the favorite part, at least for me, the tier system. Taking that away from Faction Warfare is just something that I've been looking for a long time now. So yeah, people ask about those things. So yeah, we are taking a look.
Sweet.
And we have more specifics. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to wrap this part up before we go to your presentation, or I was just going to circle back around to something CCP Psych said earlier in the piece, which is he was talking about the hierarchy, like the things that are being developed for this release can also then find homes and help other components of the game too. And I was reminded of something that CCP Muppet Hunter said in the last CSM meeting when they were discussing the new player experience. The new player experience and the refactor, and a part of the reason that has taken has been running at CCP for such a long time was not only because we needed to produce the new content, but also develop brand new underlying tools so that they could easily author that scene. Because if you've played the new player through the new player experience, it's very, very storyline. There's lots of interesting camera angles, narration, and things dynamically spawning into the scene and all that kind of stuff. And the way CCP Muppet Hunter put that to this CSM was that yes, it was work on the new player expansion, but it was almost, as to use a CCP Swift metaphor, it was like two sheep in a trench coat. One of them was the new player expansion, which everyone knows about, but the other element of it too, of that, was the creation of all these supporting tools, which then will also hopefully lead to greatest rate of authoring and more dynamic content in other parts of the game, dungeons and so forth. And before anyone calls me out for using the word dungeon, because they always do that when someone refers to dungeons on the stream. Dungeon is common industry nomenclature for that kind of a content. It goes all the way back to like D&D pen and paper games. So just because we're a space game doesn't mean we don't refer to them as dungeons when we're making them.
I can back him up. Basically, every site that you warp to in space gets called a dungeon internally.
Yep. All right. Okay. So enough about that. So CCP Aurora, you said you have like a presentation that you want to step us through with put a bit more meat on the bones from the blog yesterday. Are you ready to go ahead with that?
Yeah. Yesterday I was informed that we had the blog post going out, and remember when you agreed to that presentation. So today I rapidly threw together a slideshow. I hope it works for you guys.
Yeah, it wasn't, just to be clear, when she says she put it together, it doesn't mean this was all made from scratch. It just was turned from internal wiki dry Confluence pages into slides.
Some of it is directly copied off of our internal Confluence. It's just selective paragraphs. So,
I guess that's just an indication of time constraints.
Yeah, well, you're getting a very good look internally at some things, I suppose, too. Whoops. All right, so I hate that the scroll wheel is tied to the thing. So
Share it.
in the blog, we're going to start talking about first some of the stuff that you already know, and this is stuff that hasn't changed quite as much. But I want to just go over it so that we are covering things appropriately for those who may have not paid attention at FanFest or just turning into the first time or what have you. So the first thing that we want to talk about is the Frontline system. So this is effectively almost an attempt to simulate a war zone where instead of the armies being kind of like evenly spread out over an infinite plane, as the NPC alliances or factions are getting involved, they're kind of meeting and clashing in specific areas. And we're calling those front lines. So it's effectively where territory that is held by one faction that is at war with another faction kind of meet. Those would be frontline systems. So you can see 4 of them in the middle there, 2 blue and 2 red, with this hex diagram. We keep using this hex diagram because we just kind of like it. It looks better than dots and lines.
There you go. No.
Maybe?
Sorry, folks. There we go. I'm still looking at the Faction Warfare original slide, not the one you advanced to. See, you go to it and it gets all janky and goes away again. Don't worry, friends. We'll figure this out. Try this again.
Yes. Can you see it?
Let me see. I'll try this again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I can see the opening slide.
Can you see the next slide?
Yes, and it has stayed there.
Good. Okay.
All right, cool.
Progress. So with the frontline system, there are basically just a few simple rules that determine the state of a system. So a frontline is determined by a system which is owned by one faction, which is adjacent to a faction that it's at war with. So in the center here, red and blue are at war. Therefore, both wherever their systems touch, those systems become frontlines. Beyond that, the next rule would be a system that is not adjacent to an enemy-controlled system, but is adjacent to a frontline, becomes the command operations. These are kind of like the slightly lower pressure systems. The rewards aren't quite as high as in a frontline system if you're running the sites, but there's still quite a few sites to be run, and they'll turn over a little bit slower than the frontline systems. I'll talk about tempo in a bit later. And then last but not least is the rearguard system, or actually last but least. Rearguard systems are ones that are kind of inactive in the war zone. There are a few sites in them which can slowly be pushed, but they're effectively without rewards at the moment. So if you do a concerted effort and you keep pushing them for some time, eventually you can open up a new front line somewhere, but it's going to be a little bit tricky, and it will take quite a bit of concerted effort in order to do so. So it's generally better to attack from the command operations or frontline systems if you're looking to actually try and make progress in the war zone. The frontline systems, we're looking at adding brand new sites that will spawn very specifically in those, as well as new sites that will spawn in the command operations systems. We're looking at refreshing the sites pretty much everywhere. The frontline systems, because they'll have more sites, they'll be a little bit faster to push over. So the turnover rate will be a little bit faster. So the fastest possible system, if like your faction was pushing 100%, would be a frontline system. Then it would be command operations. Then it would be rearguard.
Before you go on, Cruel Nightmare asked in Twitch chat, what dictates opening a new front line? Would that just be simply you put your eggs into one of their rear guards, and when it flips to you, now it's a front line because it's adjacent to one of their systems?
Correct. So if you flip a system to your faction and it's all of a sudden adjacent to another enemy-controlled system, it would become a frontline, and any system adjacent to it would become a frontline. So there's a few really interesting spots in the map where there's particular systems that have like 6 connections coming off of them, and all of a sudden you could open up like a big wound in the war zone and hit a lot of things at once. But this is coming without rewards, so it generally needs to be something that's done for some sort of future effort. Perhaps if there's an objective out in that region of space that you think is going to pop up and you want to kind of make a sneaky attack through the back lines and kind of push a different angle, you can certainly try to do that, as well as maintaining the current fronts. So I just want to give you a look at what we're kind of looking at in terms of UI, first off. So this is a look at an example that we have currently running on one of our development instances of kind of playing with the map. So these systems, as they're laid out here, are not normally laid out this way. This is more of a dotland style map, and we're hoping to make tactical maps that are more useful, more readily available in game, so that you don't have to open up third parties. I think that would be pretty nice. Dotland does a great job, but we can do better. So in this map, you can very clearly see how we're like the brighter systems are the ones that are hotter. Those are the front lines. The middling ones would be command operations, and then rearguard beyond this. And then here's kind of another view of this. This is the just an overview of the. Sorry, this was a prototype. That was the word that I was looking for. A prototype of the faction warfare window that we were kind of looking at. Some of the stuff on the sides is not necessarily settled in, but you can kind of see what the faction warfare window might look like in the future. Instead of just being a field of unconnected dots with no labels, which is not particularly useful, hopefully we can make it something really interesting and tactical. So I want to talk about the part that really excites me, which is kind of refreshing the complexes that we currently have in LoSec. So there was a couple key points. I meant to animate these slides so that it didn't give all of the text, but I totally forgot to do that. There's a couple key points that we really want to tackle here. We want to expand the number of viable low-cost ships. So a few months back, I had actually looked at the statistics for ship use in the war zone, and it was pretty stark. There were hundreds, thousands of Tech 1 frigates. There's hundreds of Navy faction frigates, and then there was like a bunch of worms, and very little beyond that. So, I mean, it's pretty clear that there's two things going on. One, people who actually care about pushing systems over are going to use small ships because the small and the novice faction complexes are the most efficient way to do that with kind of the least risk. So because they have the same point value currently as every other complex, it's just better off to do that. And then the other reason is that a lot of you are just really poor. So giving you more options to kind of on the low end of ISK is kind of a really nice way to give you new opportunities, hopefully, in the war zone to kind of do new and interesting things. Also, it's just really good to mix things up every now and then. There's not really any reason that we can't swap in or out new complexes almost seasonally. So if one's not working or people are uninterested, it's gotten really stale, we can just remove it and put something new and hopefully more interesting in its place. The other thing that we wanted to do was increase value for Navy ships, and by extension for Faction LP. By giving them a very specific type of complex where those are the best ship, we can hope to see quite a bit more of them in the war zone, because it's a little bit odd that the Navy ships that are kind of like the really shiny thing that you get from the LP stores. I know that mostly it's used for data cores.
It also feels really good kind of thematically, I guess, when you're
Yeah.
talking about the actual Empire navies fighting each other, to have Navy ships in there.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully by giving them complexes where they're they're the apex ships, the most used ones, they'll see a little bit more use. And I'm also looking at giving them a little bit of balance lev as well. Mostly just small tweaks, but some of the ships really need it. Caracal Navy issue's pretty bad. And I love those people who use it, but it's usually a meme. The other thing that we were looking at was hoping to bring more people together on the front lines. So right now, and this kind of relates back to my own faction warfare experiences, if you go into faction warfare and you've got a few militia members in a system, like you really want to work together. But what happens is, you might get a message in local being like, get out of my sight, you're hurting my rewards. And that's a very awkward thing to have happen. So we're looking at making the reward scale at least a small bit so that if you and another person in your militia wind up in a site, then there won't be any incentive to like tell them to get lost. So by creating scaling rewards, we can hopefully let small groups somewhat naturally join, or small groups that are already formed just kind of go and take advantage of some of those complexes. It's not going to be a huge scaling. We're looking at about 5 per site, but even that should be hopefully a little bit helpful with the first example that I gave. And then the last one on this list was making larger ships more impactful in system contests. So one of the things that I had mentioned before was that novices and smalls have the same point values like a large or an open. So we can actually change the way that those victory points are spread out. This isn't any point that goes to you as a player, so that they're still like more valuable, but they'll also be more valuable in terms of system control. So it adds a little bit of extra impetus to people to like maybe bring out some of the larger, more expensive, higher risk ships if you're actually competing for an objective to capture a system and eventually, perhaps win a bigger reward package at the end. This created a new problem, however, which was you saw a little bit of mentioned in the blog as well, which is how do you name these things? So I came up with a bunch of complexes. I'm like, these would be cool. But then I started looking at like how do you communicate exactly what the expectations are? If you're warping around and like there's 30 sites and half of them have unique names, it would be really hard to know exactly what you're going into. So you don't want to get a situation where like you're looking at your overview and it's small, skirmish, melee, novice, beginner, medium, conflict, battle, clash, large, brawl, fisticuffs, open, etc. Like just a ridiculous list of names. We need to make it something that's understandable. There's also the option of going a different way, like where you could like right-click the beacon and go to it and say like, what are the ship restrictions? Then you could scroll through that and be like, whoops. I actually hit the scroll wheel. As I said, scroll. You could scroll through that and say, okay, my ship is allowed in this one, and then you could warp in. But that's a very slow process. And as most of you know, when you're warping around in low sec, you have maybe a few seconds if you're paying attention to get off the grid before that Loki webs you or whatever. So we need it to be a little bit snappier than that, although that would still be a really nice upgrade, and it's totally something I'm looking at. And then we need the name, if we're using a name, to fit in the overview. If we made the name super long, it would annoy all of you because you'd all have to stretch your overview out in order to see it, and then put your overview back. And so we don't want to do that. And so we came up with that naming schema that you saw in the blog, which is kind of taking the key elements, kind of as building blocks in the name, in order to tell you exactly what to expect in the site, hopefully in a very small, easy to digest snapshot. So some of this is still the same. We're sticking with the novice, small, medium, large, open set, but we're just adding a little bit to it. So instead of it just being like a medium, you might see a medium Navy 5. So Navy indicating it allows Navy and T1 ships, kind of relating back to those earlier goals I talked about in terms of all the reasons that we're looking at creating some Navy ship-specific sites. And yeah. And then a number. So that would be the number that it would scale to. So that kind of gives you an idea of the number of people that the site is geared towards. So if you see a 5, it would take, about 3 to 5 people to push off the rats in your average ship for that content in order to actually capture the site. And these are the components of those names. So this wasn't in the blog, so something to be a little bit more specific. Novice, small, medium, large, those are things that you already know. Open is left out on this list because I forgot it. If you see Navy, that indicates that it is T1 or Navy ships. It doesn't include Pirate Faction, T2, or T3. And that applies all the way down the chain. So if you have a medium Navy, then you can't bring a worm into the medium complex. Triglavian and Edencom count as Pirate Faction for this purpose because it's relatively where they sit scale-wise. Edencom's a little bit weird, obviously, but I think in large fleets, we can generally treat them as Pirate Faction. And then Advanced is Advanced. These are basically the sites as they currently exist today, with the exception of the Novice, which allow, it's today's restrictions, which is T2 and Pirate Faction are able to go in. Tech 3 of the next size down can't go in. So for example, a medium complex couldn't allow in a Tech 3 cruiser, but it would allow in a Tech 3 destroyer.
I'll ambush you there real quick. I apologize.
Uh-huh.
Apologies if this is going to be in an upcoming slide, but one of the questions which came up was, well, in the forum thread anyway, was people wondering if there's going to be any kind of implant restrictions on the acceleration gates leading into these complexes, just so you still don't get like a person in a T1 frigate, but they're booking around in snakes or something like that.
So it's something that I'd love to do. We don't have plans immediately for that. I think it's something that we might look at for next year if people like the new complexes and we want to take it a little bit further. I think that would be really valuable. I know like getting jumped by someone in like full esclaps is pretty stressful, and it leaves you without much way to fight back. But at the moment, it's a restriction that's mostly we need to think once again about how we would communicate that, especially if we have different restrictions for different sites. So we're going to take a little bit of time and work longer on that before we add it into the game.
No worries. And
that sort of restriction is something that we can relatively easily do. I've written stuff like that for the Alliance tournament. But it's kind of the communication and exactly what the restrictions are and that sort of thing. But we don't want to shake the boat.
I know. You said you were trying to keep the naming conventions for these things concise, so people know what they are at a glance. And if the more modularity you add to it, just the more complex it gets. But
yeah, most likely it would wind up being like an across-the-board ruling. But we don't really want to do that because, in some of like the larger sites, maybe it's more okay. So there's just a lot of discussions to be had on that. If people have feedback about it, I'm super happy to listen to it because it's totally something that's on our
sure.
minds.
And you want to make spaces for, players without much money, players without many skill points so they can get involved in this. But it would be a shame to put like an artificial ceiling on just how much effort people can put in the bigger sites, or the equivalent of like an open site today or something.
Yeah.
Let's not stifle any ambitions. Is what I'm saying to try and make your job harder.
At the moment, yes. The opens we couldn't put a restriction on meaningfully because there's no gate on those. So at the very least, you can be rest assured there will never be a restriction on implants in an open complex. But the others will take a little bit more evaluation.
Right. And it might still be coming up. So again, I'm sorry to preempt this, but I don't want to forget about it by the time it wraps up if it's not mentioned. But will you be talking about, or can you talk about any changes to faction warfare missions as a part of this?
I don't have anything specifically labeled in here. There will be changes to faction warfare missions coming up. This is kind of tying into the rewards and the tier system removal and that sort of thing. I don't know if Psych wants to jump in on the reward side of this.
Missions were definitely part of the discussion, and we want to do a lot of things with them. Honestly, we're not sure if they can be part of the release that the Frontlines will go out. I think, Aurora, correct me if I'm wrong, I think some changes will have to happen because of what you just said, because of the rewards and how we're going to scale them, how we're going to change them, and how we believe that missions right now, they're kind of oppressive when it comes to rewards. They're giving up too much.
We've had a lot. We looked at the metrics for this, and the amount of LP earned by someone running plexes compared to someone running missions is...
Well, it's comparable, and that says a lot. But we have a bigger plan for missions. I don't think we should discuss it now, but as we give you more information now and in the future about how we want to create new objectives, at that point we'll be able to provide more information on how we want to redesign the entire FW mission paradigm.
I think we discussed some small changes kind of leading into this, which would be effectively we would be like rebalancing the mission income. I'd love to take a look at them and just kind of rework the content so that it's not something that can be run in a stealth bomber really safely. But the problem is that there's like 350 something of these missions that exist. And so it's actually quite a lot of content for us to work through. We'll see. Most likely we're going to adjust the rewards in some way, shape, or form for the missions, at least in the short term. And then what we were talking about was actually it would be really cool for us to be able to make missions that integrated with the gameplay of actually like contesting systems. So for example, you'd get a mission that would be like, if you can capture a plex in the next 4 hours, that like a medium plex in the next 4 hours, so you're taking on like an extra specific thing, then we'll give you this extra reward on top of it, which I think would be a really nice way to like generate some additional activity and some additional rewards for doing things and make it gameplay that's a little bit more desirable and puts you at more meaningful risk.
And I just want to say for anyone who's listening or watching, I should say, who was maybe feeling a bit disappointed that the allegiance system is still like maybe not going to be coming in this release, or that we're sort of being a bit non-specific about changes to faction warfare missions. I just want to reiterate that the release coming later this year, which contains the content that CCP Aurora is going over today, is just basically the first stage. And there will be further iterations, new content, and other revisions coming over probably the next, a year beyond that. It would be helpful if you thought of this kind of like what we did with the Triglavian invasion, for example, which went for about 18 months and started with Abyssal Dead Space being introduced to the game and culminated in Pochven becoming a thing, and all the phases that went through there. The Edencom ships and the Triglavian ship line getting expanded, and all those were components of that. And it'll be similar with this. So if there's something that you're interested in or would like to see changed, that it doesn't happen on day one, we're not just going to go tools down and move on to the next thing. This is going to be an ongoing iterative process, which will occupy us for some time, and hopefully will leave us with an amazing feature that will give another 10 years of interesting gameplay when it comes to Faction Warfare space.
There's also a bunch of little things that like we couldn't fit into the blog. So I'm looking at kind of a few small, a number of balance tweaks, both for like Navy ships, and also maybe unions and that sort of thing. Like there's a lot of other little stuff that's just not getting really much exposure at the moment.
And there are other things which are definitely coming that we just can't tell you about yet because it's
exactly that's the other part of it.
I hate giving that answer to people, but it is what it is. It's the realities of sort of video game development. Also, I will say a lot of people have been throwing questions in chat, and I've tried to cherry pick one or two. I won't be able to get to all of them, obviously. So if you don't answer your question, I do apologize. I just wanted to let everyone know that next week there will be a live Q&A with CCP Aurora and CCP Psych on our Discord channel, where we'll be answering questions mostly, rather than just sort of like pitching stuff to you like we are today. And I do apologize if you've come from Discord now. The event is titled Factional Warfare Q&A. That was a mistake. Today we're doing the dev blog review and this presentation, and next week will be the actual Q&A on Discord. But I will still fish out questions here and there where I can. But again, apologies if I don't speak to all of them. But I'm holding up CCP Aurora, so please continue with your excellent presentation.
I accidentally continued already. So for those of you who are kind of wondering, like, all right, so what would the distribution of these sites look like? This might help to give you a little bit more of an idea. I just had to scrape this off the internal wiki and remove a bunch of information. But this is kind of what we're looking at in terms of the sites that you might find in space at release this fall. So that would be, it's effectively like a Navy and advanced version of each site, plus a 1 and 5 player version. And as you go towards the Frontlines, you'll find more of the 5-player versions of things in the Frontlines. So if you have a small group, you definitely want to go in that direction. And you can kind of see the base LP cost, the capture time. There's a few small things in here. You'll notice that the open and the large, they don't take 20 minutes anymore. That just felt too long. So there's a bunch of small things in here. And also take a look at that base VP column. So VP stands for victory points. You can see that currently today, like everything's about 20 points. And then this is being kind of scaled differently in order to spread things out a bit. So in this model here, the smaller sites are not worth quite as much, but they also still respond faster. And you could kind of sit and work out exactly what mathematically the contribution of each site would be if you were running them all back to back. I'm sure someone will. I've done that also myself. So this is kind of the new complexes. You can see that the rewards, as they're listed, how those would scale up. The defenders would be different. And if you look at the distribution column, you can get an idea of how these things would be distributed. So all of this, anything that contains a number, take it with a small grain of salt, because we could absolutely change it before things get released. And honestly, half of the reason that we like to show you this beforehand is so that we can listen to your feedback and make adjustments if need be. But you can notice that a lot of these say like distribution frontline only, for example, the medium advanced 5. That would be a system that would only spawn in a frontline system. So if you were looking at the war zone and you saw like rear guard and command ops and then a frontline, of those 3, you could only expect to find it in a frontline, and those would populate there. If you see static respawn, that's effectively like the sites of today, where they just keep coming back in the system for most of them. If you see common spawn, it's something about 70% of systems would have one. Moderate's about 50%, and then the ones that say medium low, it's somewhere in the 30% range. So like 1 in 3 or 4 systems, you would find one of those sites, which is not overly different than the open complex is today. And then down at the bottom, you'll see something particularly interesting, which we haven't talked a whole lot about, which is that big Battlefield Navy 30 site. That is a unique piece of new content that we're looking at, which is kind of meant more for fleet versus fleet combat. These would be pretty rare. The spawns would happen maybe once every 2 hours or so. So you'd only have one active in a war zone, and only sometimes. So ideally, like we're trying to aim it so if you're on in a specific time zone, you can generally find one if you're playing for about 2 hours. These are kind of like really big. The goal here is to make them something of a swing. So if you kick one of these really hard, it could give you a really big advantage in the Warzone contest, and shake up the current state of the faction of the system contest. So for example, if Caldari was winning a system really hard, but then Galenti swooped in and they won a couple battlefield sites in a row, they could actually really kind of stall out the Caldari offensive, or vice versa. If Caldari took it, they could kind of really rapidly swing things. Hopefully they'll be really rewarding and really interesting. We should be playtesting them at some point in the near future. You'll find them on CC. I'll let you know when. And they're a little bit different than the average site. So it's not just one big capture circle. What we're kind of looking at would be almost 2 gates that would warp you into a central site, and you would wind up rather far away from each other, on like inside of this large battlefield. And then you would have to slow boat around, because warping would be disabled between some of the capture points in this battlefield that would have like Rexo stations or big asteroid belts or whatever in it. So we're definitely trying something really new there. Hope you guys like it. Should be interesting.
A couple of questions. Where do battle cruisers fit into this?
Battle cruisers. So battle cruisers are kind of, they've always been
NPC. Yeah, sorry, go on. I was looking at the wrong column when I saw NPC Defender. But please continue.
Okay. Battle cruisers would generally be participating in the larges. A couple battle cruisers can kind of show up and rapidly take down a battleship if they manage to catch one. We don't have a battle cruiser specific site at the moment.
Nice. And nice dank leak on the
battlefield thing.
On the small Navy sites.
The small Navy sites.
Yeah.
Which? Oh, I didn't even notice that. Yeah, we're looking at new ships. I'm not going to tell you what ones, but there may or may not be a hint on this slide.
Don't worry, Twitch chat was onto that way before I said anything.
I didn't even notice until you just pointed it out. I knew I'd be leaking something.
Now you're going to be worried about the rest of the presentation.
Trying to figure out what is happening, and then I
love it. Carry on.
So so there is additional content that we're not allowed to tell you about that you can catch some clues from that.
Well, technically, you didn't tell anyone about it.
I haven't said anything. No,
exactly.
Emily, if you're watching this, it wasn't me. Okay, so let's talk about kind of the design around like the system turnover rate. So this is getting back into just pontificating about the development process. Something that we or I thought a lot about was the system turnover rate. So if we're adding a bunch of sites to faction warfare, I need to be sure that it's not all of a sudden turning over too fast because there's a bunch of VP being injected into the system. And I need to be sure that I don't over adjust and make things too slow. There's a good middle line in there somewhere. We have a plan to, our target here is to really kind of keep Eve feeling somewhat unique. We want these contests to be a thing that takes place over several days. Capturing the system is rather a big shift compared to Albion Online, where like a system or a region would turn over in a matter of 15 minutes. We want things to kind of feel not exactly slower. There's quite a bit of action happening, but we want like each turnover to be something with gravitas, as people have to kind of readjust, moving their assets around in order to deal with that change. And yes, I'll get to Citadels shortly. So we're looking at about 48 hours. Today it's about 24. The 48 was picked just to give us a little bit more leeway with the advantage system that you saw some information about in the blog yesterday. I'll get to that in a moment. So if you're pushing all of the system, all of the sites in the system constantly, your alliance is just dominating it with really good advantage and the good turnover rate. You could still push it over in about the same time as it takes today, or it might go back and forth for a bit longer. It's definitely something that we can play with. Some of this will just we'll need to watch and see how the war zone reacts. And some of this is, of course, always open to adjustment. It's a very soft control where we're tweaking like little numbers here, like, this needs a little bit more victory points. Contribution isn't high enough. This is spawning too much. We'll turn that down, that sort of thing. Okay. So the advantage system was something that was relatively new that we talked about in the blog yesterday. And I want to give you a little bit more overview of what we're thinking there. So on the kind of lore side, the advantage system is a simulation of all of the complex factors that might factor in to an empire's success or failure in a conflict. So it's all of the little things, their ability to resupply, the morale of their troops, their ability to collect intel or sabotage their foes, propaganda in order to win the hearts and minds of people in the system. All of these little things can be combined into kind of one measure, which is kind of how well is that faction doing, so to speak. And by doing this, it allows us to create a bunch of new gameplay without having to create a new system for each, which is really the core reason that we're looking at something like this. So if we, for example, wanted to add in some sort of hacking gameplay to faction warfare, as well as some sort of resupplying thing, and someone over here, like you're going to be making weapons for the militia and using some of your getting paid for that. We don't want to have to go and be like, all right, so exactly what are the mechanics of the hacking and how will this impact the war, and exactly what are the mechanics of the hauling? Where do those resources get used? This actually makes things a little bit simpler because it allows us to kind of pool all of these points and kind of really rapidly pump out different and interesting gameplay that can have an effect on the war that isn't just combat relating to the sites. The other thing is that we really wanted it to be something that kind of supports the primary gameplay of faction warfare, in that you have all of these different sites and people are going to them to fight each other. And we didn't want to accidentally crush that by like, oops, we accidentally made hauling the primary, like the optimal way to win. And so nobody's really fighting anymore. They're just running resources. So you still have to fight. The fighting's not going anywhere. Hopefully it's intensifying. And we can add a bunch more of things for players who are looking to participate who aren't necessarily great at PvP themselves.
Yeah,
And this is the image that was. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I think that is one of the most important things with the advantage system, that it opens the door for us in the future to create opportunities for maybe industrialists, miners, other gameplay styles that usually don't really participate in FW.
Yeah, it gives us a lot of opportunities. And I've got an example of something kind of cool that I like the idea of. There's some really fun stuff that we can do with it that I'll get to in a moment. Um, so the advantage system, as we're kind of looking at it, you can kind of think of this as similar to ADM. So it measures the progress in a specific system. This is not war zone wide, so that each system would have a unique value for each faction. And it's effectively two bars. So defenders' contributions and then the attackers' contributions. And then what we're looking at doing is just comparing how well each faction is doing. And then if one faction is doing better than the other, we give that faction a little bit of a bonus in terms of victory points. So for example, if blue is Caldari here and red is Galenti, we'll call them. Galenti are attacking this Caldari system, and they're doing really good in terms of their hauling and stuff. They only have one system leading into it, whereas like the Caldari have two command ops backing up their other one, which is the terrain bonus that we mentioned. This would give them, every time they capture a site, it would run a calculation. There's math somewhere that I cut out of this image in order to avoid giving too much stuff away because some of this stuff is still under development. And they would earn some degree of bonus victory points for that site. So for example, if the site was worth 20 victory points and they had a 20% advantage, they'd get an extra 2 points, 1 point, something. They'd get an extra bit of victory points on top of it. And there's a whole bunch of things that kind of can make these things change. So there's something that you always have agency to kind of push up and down based on what you do. So if you're running supply missions, you're going to help out your side and push your side up. You can also be out in space hunting down enemy supply depots, for example, which is almost like a decay mechanic that we're looking at. So instead of just having the points kind of naturally drain out of the system, we can make it a little bit more interesting by letting you shoot them. And so instead of having them drain out, what happens is that periodically over time, these supply depots will spawn, which represent some portion of the points in that faction's pool. And when you destroy them, they get removed from the pool. So if you're about to hit a system and you're going to try to push really hard for a couple hours, it'd be a really good idea to go make sure that you hit any supply depots in that system to weaken that faction and take advantage of it in the meantime. The propaganda structures, I'll get into that in a moment. The battlefield I kind of showed you, so that was that big, rare fleet focus site that we were looking at. The only other additional thing here that hasn't really been explained is this terrain advantage. So I mentioned this a little bit during FanFest, in that we wanted to find ways to make the terrain a little bit more interesting so every system's not the same, open up some new tactics, and that sort of thing. So what we're looking at here is that terrain would effectively be a floor value. So for example, if you have, it's effectively representing the supply lines that lead into a system. So if there's a command operations system next to your system that you're defending, then it will get some portion of automatic points added to the pool just by default. And then if you have more command operation systems, like if you had 5, the bar would be like half full. And the attacker gets additional points for every frontline connecting to that system. So if you kind of surround a system, you can be quite good. And this also means that if you cut a system off, they're going to lose their command operations, you're going to gain an advantage floor, and the attacker will be able to have like a really strong push for some time until the defender can work their bar back up. So let's talk about what we can do with this. So this is an idea that I've been pitching that I think is pretty fun. It's just kind of an example of one of the interesting ways in which we can make this work. So if you picture almost just a deployable, you're sticking a big post in space with a bunch of megaphones on it and some propaganda posters that's transmitting propaganda down to the planets of the system, kind of winning them to your side. It's not too different from today's society. What this would do is basically steal points from the enemy faction and apply them to your faction, kind of naturally siphoning them off. And there's a bunch of rules that I have kind of in the pitch for this, where like you can only have a maximum of 3 per faction. anchored in the system, and then they would just kind of compete and pull points. So in this example, in this image that you can see here, the defender has 3 of these propaganda beacons set up that are slowly draining points compared to the red's 2. So they're going to get, every time this thing ticks, every like 15 minutes, points would be pulled from the red pool and added to the blue pool. And this would just be a thing in space that you could go and shoot. So if you wanted to just kind of get into a propaganda contest with people, maybe these things would be available through the LP store. Still, no idea. This is not actually confirmed for development. But I just think it's kind of a fun idea, and it really highlights the sort of things that we could do with this that might be really interesting. Could also see applying this sort of thing to ADMs and nullsec. Who knows? So, the other
And
thing
we said no
slide.
spoilers.
No spoilers. That's not a spoiler. It's a random thought. Other things. So, this is a list of random other things that I got to when we were about 5 minutes before this meeting. So, some of these we've already talked about, but the top one needs a little bit more explanation. So, we were talking about citadels in space. This does tie into the whole allegiance discussion and what it means to ally with a faction, but at the same time, we're also looking for a relatively simple and easy rule that we can apply. And the one that we're looking at the moment is very simply changing what it means to be able to dock in a system based on whether or not it's in faction warfare, which is this. If you're in a militia and the system is controlled by an enemy faction, you're only able to dock and undock in pods. So the reason that we were looking at this in particular was because there were some edge cases that were a little bit tricky to deal with, especially surrounding citadels in faction warfare, with people getting like fully locked out of their structure and that sort of thing that we didn't want to make like big problems for. So this would allow you to always dock and manage your structure if you needed to, but it would only be in a pod, and you'd have to undock in a pod afterwards. But hopefully that should ease the restrictions. In order to keep the rules equal across space, we'd also be applying this to stations because we kind of want to not have those lines get too blurry between the two. So that would almost be new. Right now it would be a small benefit, I guess, because you'd be able to dock your pod into a citadel. But yeah. So we didn't want to step too hard on the third parties that are living there or factions that are coming through in order to run their logistics networks to nullsec, all of that sort of thing. So it should be a relatively soft rule that helps to avoid the particular issue of militia members who don't own a system being able to just kind of avoid any restrictions by using a friendly citadel. Or a neutral citadel in that case. Another thing I just want to remind you guys coming is the no cooldown for clone swap in NPC station. That particular change I think is coming out this month. I think it's going to be a little bit early. So that one is fun. If you live in NPC, I think that hits faction warfare quite heavily, but that one's actually a pretty wide-reaching change. So hope you guys enjoy that. What else do I have on this list? What's happening to the tier system? CCP Psych, what is happening to the tier system?
It's getting deleted.
Yep. This is my last slide. Okay.
That's okay. I was just going to bring us back.
Yeah.
That's all.
Feel free to bring us back. I'm going to close this out. So yeah, we're looking at fully deleting the tier system. We want the rewards to kind of be beneficial in their own right. And at FanFest, you saw us talk a bit about the objective-driven system, objective-driven design, and rewards associated with that. So for example, instead of having tiers just kind of representing an overall, you get a benefit that's very vague because your faction's doing good right now, it would instead be your faction has a very specific reason to want to capture that system, and if you help them do it, you'll gain some additional bonus package yourself, is kind of the way that we want to go in the future. So if you help your help your faction achieve their objectives, then you'll get rewarded appropriately for each of those. And ideally, there's going to be a whole bunch of different objectives that you can interact with out in space.
Yeah, and the plan is that as we move forward, we will be updating and creating more objectives. So what you see day one with the frontline system, it's not going to be all there is.
Yep, we're very much laying the groundwork for this fall expansion. A lot of it is the stuff that we've shown here. There's a bunch of little stuff that is also coming that hasn't been announced. And there were no leaks in this presentation, so please don't read into anything that you saw.
None whatsoever.
None whatsoever.
Yeah, just thanks, Teddy, for the sick Foxholders hoodies that you sent us. It's even embroidered with my name. I want to stand up to show you the whole thing, but I've got my Harry Potter boxer shorts on, and no one needs to see that. Maybe if you're fortunate, I'll do that in one of my own streams. I'm just going through some of the questions that I had lined up before the start of the stream that I'd cribbed from the forums and the subreddit. But I think you've pretty much addressed all of those. I know there were a lot of questions asked in Twitch chat while CCP Aurora was giving a presentation. We managed to get some of those in there, but not all of them. I'll just remind you guys that there is going to be a live Q&A on Discord next week with CCP Aurora and CCP Psych, where it'll just be, the entire thing's just going to be a discussion with the people who are there in the Discord without having to sort of sit there and through the presentation. But we're coming up on an hour, so we can probably wrap this up now. I think that was really, really good and put a lot of meat on the bones from the dev blog yesterday, and that people heard some things here which they can get pretty excited about. I did notice, for example, when you're talking about the changes to the Citadels, however, in Twitch chat, there was, some differing opinions. Some people loved it. I saw Michael Vector say, like, oh, please don't do this. So in the coming months leading up to the eventual release of all these updates, I assume there are going to be ample opportunities for these kinds of discussions. And so if you guys are active on the e-forums, for example, want to provide your feedback there, we can take all that into account. And of course, you can put stuff to CCP Aurora and CCP Psych during the Q&A next week. I guess it can also be just like a sharing of your opinion, right, as opposed to strictly asking and answering questions if you would prefer. Okay.
Yeah, sounds good. I look forward to answering questions. Mm-hmm. I tend to pop into Discord at random times and answer questions when I can. There's a lot of stuff in there. So
CCP Psych, you have to bounce and go to a meeting with the CSM in just a couple of minutes. Is there anything you wanted to add on at the end here before we go?
Yes. People should pay attention on what is happening in game because we are giving out information or let's say we're trying to foreshadow what is happening, and I'm just gonna leave it at that.
All right, no worries, that's cool. Just a little bit more housekeeping. For folks who are interested tonight, particularly new players who have come to the stream because they saw the notification or something in game, tonight at 1900, in just 3 hours from now, Mike Kingswell will be back doing another one of his excellent series of lectures for each EVE Academy based on the EVE University curriculum. Tonight, the subject is going to be on D-Scan. I've already mentioned the Discord Q&A with these two folks next week. Not next week, but the week after that, we'll have another stream like this one, and which will also be focusing on faction warfare related stuff, but from the lore side of things and the sort of the narrative driven design element, and with CCP Loki and CCP Delicate Zero. So there'll be more talk about this update and the faction warfare goings on, but just from the in-game lore kind of a perspective. But I think we've sort of wrapped it up there. What I'll do is once the stream ends while we're still on the air though, I'll do a Twitch giveaway in chat for a bunch of just random old skins that haven't been available for ages, but they all look sick, and so they're a little bit rare now. So I'll get 10 winners for that, and then we'll raid you off to someone once I do the draw. So stick around for that. You guys need to add anything else, or shall we stick a pin in it there?
I think that's all that I had prepped for. There's a bunch of other little stuff that I'll be able to talk about in more details hopefully soon. Mm-hmm. And there's also kind of little stuff that I'm hoping to sneak in for this fall as well. So looking at Munins and all of that sort of thing.
Oh, and there's one thing that did come up I was going to ask, sorry, just quickly, was some people curious about when these things were going to turn up on. The giveaway isn't going yet, guys. Just Just chill.
They're going for it.
When things from this will start to turn up on Singularity for them to test out, will it be coming out in dribs and drabs that things are ready to get tested, or are we going to sort of like wait until a month out, for example, from release, and just go blah, drop it all at once? Do you have any idea about that?
There's actually some sneaky things that are already like in the code on Tranquility, but they're all kind of like feature flag turned off.
Okay.
So it will be coming out before, especially the complex stuff. That'll be coming out before. I'd say like especially. Let me figure out my months in order here. In September, you'll probably see a lot of stuff on Singularity.
All right. Oh, well, everyone, thank you for joining. Like I said, stick around. Oh, sorry, go CCP Psych.
Just one final thing from me. It's the best time for people to send us feedback from everything they heard or they read. And maybe, even after the Q&A next week, just putting it out there.
Yeah, why don't we spin up a forum, a fresh forum thread after the Q&A where people can then sort of digest everything that was in the blog, in today's stream, and in the Q&A. Then they can put their thoughts out there, and we'll farm that for some. All right. We'll make it
we're paying a lot of attention to what you guys are talking about and how you guys feel about the things that we're working on. So we want to make it cool, and you can help us do it.
Right on. All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in. Stick around for the raffle. I've got to get CCP Psych to his CSM meeting, so we'll stick a pin in it there, and see you in a couple of weeks with CCP Delegate Zero and CCP Lucky.